Welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be back.
So today we're tackling something lots of people run into, I think. That whole challenge of finding somewhere temporary to live when you're moving to a new city.
Especially for a job, yeah. And often it's a really quick turnaround, not much notice.
Exactly. The pressure's on. And instead of just, general advice, we're doing something specific.
Okay.
This whole deep dive, it's based on just one source.
Yeah.
It's an interview we found where a listener shared their actual experience moving to Manchester recently for work
Ah.
under that exact time pressure.
Okay, so like a first-hand account, a case study.
Precisely. And our mission here is basically to pull out the key stuff from their story. What choices they made, the problems they actually faced, maybe some unexpected good bits.
And the tips they learned the hard way.
Yeah. So you, listening, can get a real feel for it and maybe avoid some stress if you're ever in that situation. It's learning from someone who's just been through it.
Makes sense. It's often more helpful than just a list of options, seeing how someone actually navigated it.
Okay, so let's get into their specific situation then. They're moving, as I said, to Manchester. New job, publishing company. Sounds great.
Pretty standard move on the face of it.
Right. But here's the kicker, the thing that really shaped everything.
Yeah.
They had about 3 weeks. 3 weeks to get from Bristol to Manchester and start the job.
Wow. 3 weeks. That's incredibly tight.
Yeah.
So finding a proper long-term flat beforehand, just not going to happen.
No chance. So needing temporary accommodation wasn't really a choice. It was just the reality.
Which, like you said, is happening more and more. Companies want quick starts. The housing market doesn't always cooperate.
So faced with that, needing a place, not sure for exactly how long, what did they actually land on? What kind of temporary place?
They ended up choosing a service department.
Okay.
He sort of described it as like a middle ground between a hotel room and a proper flat. It came furnished, had a little kitchen area, bit of living space.
And why that? Because presumably they looked at other things too. The source mentioned that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They considered hostels first.
Right. Obvious cheap option, maybe.
Maybe, but they ruled it out pretty quickly. New job, needing to focus, maybe do some work from home temporarily. They just worried about noise and, lack of privacy.
Fair enough. Understandable. What else?
Then they looked at Airbnb, which seems like the go-to for a lot of people for short-term stuff.
You'd think so.
But they actually found the weekly prices were, well, higher than they expected, especially compared to the service department option they found.
Interesting. So the service department wasn't necessarily the absolute cheapest, but it had other things going for it, things that made it worthwhile for them in that specific pressure cooker situation.
Exactly. Flexibility was one thing, and just the general comfort level felt worth paying a bit more for. But the really big advantages they highlighted were more about logistics.
Okay.
Well, everything was included. Utilities, internet, even like a weekly clean. So they didn't have that immediate hassle of setting up bills, finding an internet provider the moment they landed.
Oh, that's huge. That saves so much mental energy when you're starting a new job.
Totally. And maybe the biggest surprise benefit they mentioned, no deposit.
Wow, really? No deposit up front?
Yep. Which, when you think about it, if you're already paying for movers, maybe overlapping rent for a bit, not having to find a big chunk of cash for a deposit right away is a massive relief.
Yeah, that frees up cash flow massively. Less stress.
Okay, so it sounds pretty good on paper. What was the reality like living there day to day?
Overall, they said it was actually pretty positive. Use the phrase, not too many issues.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There usually is. And for them, the main drawback was the location. The apartment itself was fine, but it wasn't ideally situated for getting into the city center for work.
Ah, how bad was it?
It was about a 25-minute bus ride, which, okay, might not sound terrible.
But on a daily basis, starting a new job. Exactly. And they mentioned the buses weren't always reliable. Delays happened.
Oof. Okay, let's just sit with that a second. Starting a brand new job, trying to make a good impression, and you're stressed about whether the bus is going to make you late.
Yeah, it adds this whole layer of friction you just don't need.
It really highlights that when you're looking at temporary places, location isn't just about miles, it's about the reliability of the commute, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was the main negative point they raised about the whole temporary setup. Otherwise, it seemed to work well.
Got it. Okay, so practicalities then. Cost of living, especially food. They had this small kitchen. How did they manage?
This was another key practical thing they mentioned. They made a conscious effort to cook most meals there.
Even with just basic stuff,
Like
a microwave stove.
Yeah, a microwave stove, fridge, the basics. But they were really clear that doing this saved them a lot of money compared to grabbing takeaway or eating out all the time.
It sounds obvious cooking saves money, but the insight is making it work even in a temporary, perhaps limited, setup.
Right, it forces you to be a bit more strategic, maybe simpler meals, but it was crucial for them financially during that transition phase.
Makes total sense. Okay, so stepping back from their day-to-day,
Hmm.
what were the big lessons, the main advice they wanted to pass on from this whole experience?
They boiled it down to three main tips, really. First one, start looking early.
Don't wait.
Don't wait, especially in big cities, the decent, flexible, temporary places that get booked up fast. You need options, not just desperation when you're under pressure.
Good point. What was number two?
Read the reviews and read them carefully. Don't just look at the 4.5 stars.
Dive into the comments.
Yeah. What are people actually saying? Photos can be, well, misleading sometimes. Reviews give you the ground truth noise levels, things that didn't work, hidden fees, that sort of stuff.
Crucial intel. Any specifics they said to look for in reviews?
They didn't detail specific keywords, but the sense was look for patterns, look for things that sound like genuine annoyances or things that weren't quite as advertised. The gotchas.
Right, the hidden stuff.
Okay.
Okay, and the third tip.
Prioritize flexibility on dates.
Because you don't know how long you'll need it.
Exactly. Finding that permanent place might happen quicker than you think, or it might drag on for weeks longer. You really want a temporary place that understands that and can accommodate changes without massive penalties if possible.
Start early. Read reviews like a hawk. Get flexible dates. Okay, solid advice. Did they mention any specific websites or apps they actually used or found helpful?
They did list a few. For the service departments, they actually used a site called Silverdoor.
Haven't heard of that one specifically.
Yeah, seems more specialized. They also checked the big ones like Booking.com, and they mentioned a couple of others they came across. Sabbatical homes, apparently good for short-term academic lets, though not quite right for them.
Okay.
And also Spare Room. They suggested that sometimes you can find short-term sublets on there, which might be an option if the budget is really, really tight.
Good to have a few different avenues beyond the usual suspects. So the big question, after all this temporary living, did they find